Children who appear overly independent and mature at a young age often develop psychological challenges as adults. And I know that sounds counterintuitive at first because we're taught to celebrate independence, right? We praise the kid who doesn't cry when mom leaves, the child who solves their own problems, the teenager who never asks for anything. Society loves a self-sufficient person. But from a psychological perspective, this behavior is often a coping mechanism rooted in early emotional neglect or unmet needs. And that's what we need to talk about today, because there's a massive difference between healthy independence and what I'm describing here. And understanding that difference might just explain some things about yourself that you've never been able to put into words. So let's start with what this actually looks like in childhood, because I think a lot of people hear this and immediately think, oh, you're talking about responsible kids, kids who do their homework without being told, kids who help around the house. And no, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm describing is something deeper, something that has this quality of premature emotional shutdown. It's the 7-year-old who never complains when they're hurt, the 9-year-old who takes care of their younger siblings without being asked and seems to have this eerie adult-like quality about them, the 12-year-old who watches their parents struggle but never asks for the toy they want because they've already calculated that it would be a burden. These are children who have learned, often through painful experience, that their needs are secondary, or worse, that their needs are the problem itself. And here's the thing that really gets me about this whole dynamic. These kids are often praised. Teachers love them because they don't cause problems. Parents brag about how easy they are. Other adults comment on how mature they seem for their age. But what everyone is missing is that this maturity isn't coming from a place of genuine development. It's coming from a place of survival. These children have learned to read the room with the precision of someone whose emotional safety depends on it. They've become hyper-aware of other people's moods, other people's stress levels, other people's capacity for them. And that hyper-awareness isn't a skill they chose to develop. It's something they had to develop because their environment taught them that their emotional needs were either unwelcome or would be met with blame, indifference, or punishment. Think about what happens when a child reaches out for help, and instead of receiving support, they get criticism. Maybe they struggled with homework, and instead of patience, they got frustration. Maybe they expressed fear, and instead of comfort, they got told to toughen up. Maybe they showed sadness, and instead of empathy, they got told they were being dramatic or too sensitive. Each one of these interactions is teaching that child a lesson, and that lesson is this: you are on your own, your emotions are too much, your needs are a burden, and if you want to be safe, if you want to be loved, if you want to be accepted, you need to stop needing things from other people. And that's absolutely devastating when you think about it, because childhood is supposed to be the time when we learn that the world is safe, that people can be trusted, that connection is possible. But these kids are learning the exact opposite. Now let's talk about the psychological mechanisms at play here, because this isn't just about feeling bad or having a tough childhood. This is about how our brains literally wire themselves based on early experiences. Attachment theory, which was developed by psychologist John Bowlby in the 1950s and then expanded by Mary Ainsworth, gives us a framework for understanding this. Bowlby observed that children develop internal working models of relationships based on how their caregivers respond to their needs. When caregivers are consistently available, responsive, and attuned, children develop what we call secure attachment. They learn that people are trustworthy, that their needs matter, that connection is safe and rewarding. But when caregivers are inconsistent, dismissive, or emotionally unavailable, children develop insecure attachment patterns. And one of these patterns is called avoidant attachment. And this is what we're really talking about when we discuss these overly independent children. Kids with avoidant attachment learn to suppress their needs and emotions because expressing them doesn't lead to connection, it leads to rejection or neglect. So they adapt. They become self-reliant, not because they want to be, but because they have to be. They learn to deactivate their attachment system, to shut down those natural human impulses to reach out, to seek comfort, to ask for help. And this happens at such a fundamental neurological level that by the time they're adults, they don't even realize they're doing it. It just feels like who they are. And here's where it gets even more complex. These children often develop what psychologists call parentification, which is when a child takes on adult responsibilities and emotional roles that should be handled by the adults in their life. Sometimes this is instrumental parentification, where kids are doing physical tasks like cooking, cleaning, or taking care of siblings. Other times it's emotional parentification, where children are becoming the emotional support system for their parents, where they're managing their parents' moods, their parents' problems, their parents' stress. And in both cases, what's happening is a reversal of the natural order. The child becomes the caregiver. The child learns that love is conditional on their ability to meet other people's needs needs while suppressing their own. This creates what I think of as a fundamental betrayal of childhood, because childhood is supposed to be selfish in the healthiest sense of that word. Kids are supposed to be demanding and needy and emotional and dependent, because that's how they learn to trust. That's how they develop a sense of self-worth. That's how they understand that they matter. But these kids miss all of that. They skip right over the developmental stage where they're supposed to learn that they're valuable just for existing, not for what they can do or how little trouble they cause. And that missing piece, that hole in their development, it doesn't just go away. It shapes everything that comes after. So what does this look like when these children become adults? Well, this is where things get really interesting and also really painful, because all of those childhood adaptations that helped them survive, all of those coping mechanisms that protected them, they become the very things that sabotage their adult relationships and their happiness. They handle problems alone, they refuse help, and they avoid burdening others. On the surface, this might look like strength, it might look like independence, it might even look like mental toughness, but underneath, it's emotional isolation, and it's lonely as hell. These adults struggle to share their struggles or disappointments. They've internalized this belief that their problems are their own responsibility, and that asking for help is a form of weakness or imposition, so they suffer in silence. They deal with breakups alone. They handle job losses alone. They navigate anxiety and depression alone. And the cruel irony is that while they're doing all of this, they're often surrounded by people who would help them if they only knew what was going on. But they don't know because the person never tells them. They've become so good at wearing a mask of competence and capability that nobody realizes they're drowning. And it's not just that they don't ask for help. They actively push people away when help is offered. Someone says, "Hey, are you okay? You seem off." And they immediately respond with, "Oh yeah, I'm fine. Everything's good. No worries." They minimize their pain. They deflect concern. They change the subject. Because on a deep, unconscious level, they still believe what they learned as children, that showing need leads to rejection, that vulnerability is dangerous, that people who say they care will ultimately disappoint you or blame you or use your weakness against you. So they keep their walls up. They keep everyone at arm's length, and they tell themselves that this is just who they are, that they're just independent people who don't need much from others. But here's the thing about those walls. Yes, they keep out potential hurt and disappointment, but they also keep out love, intimacy, genuine connection, support, joy. They keep out all the things that make life worth living. And over time, what happens is these people find themselves feeling profoundly alone, even when they're in relationships, even when they're surrounded by family and friends, because those relationships can't go deep. They can't be truly intimate, because true intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is the one thing these people have learned they absolutely cannot afford. This often manifests in romantic relationships as a pattern where they're attracted to people but terrified of depending on them. They might sabotage relationships right when things start getting serious. They might pick fights or create distance when their partner gets too close. They might maintain multiple exit strategies, always keeping one foot out the door just in case. And their partners, understandably, get confused and hurt because they're getting mixed messages. On one hand, the person seems to want the relationship. On the other, they won't let themselves be truly known, truly vulnerable, truly dependent in even the smallest ways. And it's not just romantic relationships. This plays out in friendships too. These are the people who are always there for everyone else, but never let anyone be there for them. They're the friend you call in a crisis, the one who shows up with solutions and support, but when they're struggling, they disappear. They cancel plans, they go quiet, they handle it on their own. And their friends might not even realize anything is wrong until much later, if ever, because these people have perfected the art of seeming fine when they're falling apart. In the workplace, this can manifest as overworking, as taking on too much, as never delegating, as refusing to admit when they're overwhelmed. They become the person who stays late, who never takes vacation, who can't say no to additional projects. And on one level, this might be rewarded. They might get promotions and recognition for being such a hard worker. But on another level, they're burning out. They're exhausting themselves trying to prove their worth through productivity, because they learned as children that their value lies in what they can do for others, not in who they inherently are. The really insidious part is how this manifests in their internal world, in their relationship with themselves. Because these people are often incredibly self-critical. They have impossibly high standards. They beat themselves up for any perceived failure or weakness. They don't extend to themselves the compassion and understanding they readily give to others. And why would they? Nobody taught
them that they deserved compassion. Nobody modeled self-care and self-acceptance. They learned that needs are shameful, that emotions are inconvenient, that asking for anything makes you a burden. So they internalize all of that and turn it into a relentless inner critic that punishes them for being human. They might also develop this really skewed perception of other people's emotional needs. Because they've had to suppress their own needs so thoroughly, they sometimes view normal human dependency as weakness or neediness in others. They might get frustrated with partners who want emotional support, with friends who need reassurance, with family members who express vulnerability, not because they're cruel people, but because seeing other people express needs that they've had to deny in themselves triggers something painful. It reminds them of what they've had to give up, what they've had to bury, and that's threatening to the entire defense structure they've built. This is what psychologists mean when they talk about avoidant attachment in adults. These are people who desperately want connection, who are inherently social creatures, just like all humans, but who have learned that connection is dangerous. So they maintain what's called deactivating strategies. These are unconscious behaviors designed to keep intimacy at bay. Things like focusing on your partner's flaws when you start feeling too close, maintaining an idealized ex in your mind as a reason why current partners don't measure up, emphasizing your independence and self-sufficiency, avoiding talking about feelings, keeping busy to avoid intimacy. All of these strategies served a purpose once. They protected a child who needed protection, but now they're just getting in the way. And here's what really breaks my heart about all of this. The cost of these defense mechanisms is enormous. These people miss out on so much. They miss out on the relief of sharing a burden. They miss out on the comfort of being truly seen and accepted. They miss out on the joy of interdependence, of building something with someone, of knowing that you don't have to face everything alone. They miss out on deep friendship, on passionate romance, on the kind of family bonds that sustain you through hard times. And they miss out on the experience of being human in the fullest sense, because being human means being vulnerable, being dependent, being emotional, being connected. What they don't realize is that the independence they're so proud of, the self-sufficiency they've built their identity around, it's not actually strength. It's a prison. It's a cage they built to keep themselves safe. But now they're trapped inside it. And the tragedy is that they don't even recognize it as a cage because it's all they've ever known. The walls feel like protection, not limitation. The isolation feels like peace, not loneliness. Until one day it doesn't. Until one day they realize that they've achieved everything they thought they were supposed to achieve. They've been exactly as strong and independent as they thought they needed to be, and they're still not happy. They're still fundamentally unfulfilled. And that realization can be absolutely crushing. But here's the thing, and this is important. None of this is permanent. None of this is unfixable. Yes, these patterns run deep. Yes, they were formed early and reinforced over years. Yes, they feel like fundamental parts of who you are, but they're not. They're adaptations. They're learned behaviors. And what was learned can be unlearned. It's not easy and it's not quick, but it is absolutely possible to change these patterns and to build the capacity for healthy connection that you missed out on developing as a child. If this resonates with you, if you're recognizing yourself in this description, the first step is actually just what you're doing right now. It's awareness. It's understanding that your independence isn't just a personality trait, it's a defense mechanism. It's recognizing that your difficulty with vulnerability isn't a flaw in your character, it's a wound from your past. And that distinction matters enormously because you can't heal something if you think it's just who you are. But if you understand it as something that happened to you, something you developed in response to your environment, then you can start to work with it. The next step is accepting your own need for connection. And I mean really accepting it, not just intellectually acknowledging it. This means recognizing that you are not different from other humans. You are not special in not needing people. You are not above the fundamental human requirement for connection and interdependence. this. It's okay to rely on others. It doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you a burden. It makes you human. And I know that might sound obvious, but for people with this pattern, it's a genuinely difficult thing to internalize because everything in their experience has taught them otherwise. Then comes the hard part, which is practicing small acts of dependency. And I do mean small, because if you try to go from total independence to deep vulnerability overnight, you're probably going to freak yourself out and retreat even further. Start with tiny things. Ask a friend to help you move a piece of furniture, even though you could probably do it yourself. Tell someone when you're having a bad day instead of saying everything is fine. Let someone buy you coffee without immediately offering to get the next one. Share a small disappointment or frustration. These might seem like nothing, but for someone with this pattern, they're actually enormous because each one is an act of trust. Each one is a test of whether the world will punish you for having needs like it did when you were a child.
And here's what you'll probably discover. Most of the time, people respond well. Most of the time, people are glad you trusted them. Most of the time, sharing your struggle brings you closer rather than pushing them away. And each time that happens, each time you take a risk and it pays off, you're building new neural pathways. You're teaching your brain that connection can be safe, that vulnerability can be rewarding, that people can be trustworthy. You're literally rewiring the attachment patterns that were formed in childhood. Therapy can be incredibly helpful in this process, particularly therapists who specialize in attachment or trauma, because a good therapist can provide what's called a corrective emotional experience. They can be the consistent, attuned, accepting presence that you needed as a child but didn't get. And in the context of that relationship, you can learn to express needs, to show vulnerability, to depend on someone, and to have that be okay. That experience can then generalize to other relationships in your life. Another important piece is learning to recognize and challenge your own internal narratives. When you notice yourself thinking things like, I can't burden anyone with this, or asking for help makes me weak, or I should be able to handle this on my own, stop and ask yourself, where did I learn that? Is it actually true? What would I tell a friend who was thinking this way? Often, we're much kinder and more reasonable with other people than we are with ourselves. Learning to extend that same compassion inward is crucial. It's also important to understand that healing this pattern doesn't mean becoming dependent in an unhealthy way. The goal isn't to swing from one extreme to another, from total independence to total dependence. The goal is interdependence, which is the ability to be both independent and dependent as the situation requires. It's being able to handle things on your own when that makes sense, but also being able to reach out and accept support when you need it. It's having healthy boundaries while also allowing genuine intimacy. It's being strong enough to be vulnerable. And one of the most powerful things you can do is to actively choose people who can meet you where you are. This is crucial. You no longer need to beg for love from those who couldn't give it. If you're trying to learn vulnerability and connection with people who are emotionally unavailable, critical, or unreliable, you're just going to re-traumatize yourself. You're going to confirm all your worst fears about what happens when you show need. Instead, look for people who demonstrate consistency, who show up, who respond with empathy, who respect boundaries, who can handle emotional honesty. These are the people who can help you heal, who can show you that connection doesn't have to be dangerous. Remember, you developed these patterns as a child because they helped you survive an environment that wasn't meeting your needs. That child did nothing wrong. That child was adapting brilliantly to a difficult situation, but you're not in that situation anymore. You're an adult now with choices, with agency, with the ability to create different circumstances. You don't have to carry those childhood adaptations forever. You can honor them for what they were, protection when you needed it, and then gently, gradually let them go as you build new patterns that serve your adult self better. The path forward isn't about suddenly becoming a different person. It's about slowly, carefully building the capacity for connection that you were denied the chance to develop naturally. It's about learning that vulnerability can be a bridge rather than a trap, that depending on others can be a source of strength rather than weakness, that you don't have to earn love through perfect independence. You can just be human, messy and needy and emotional and imperfect, and still be worthy of love and connection. So, if you found yourself in this video, if this
hit home in ways that are uncomfortable, but also maybe clarifying, know that you're not alone in this. There are so many people walking around with this same pattern, feeling isolated in their independence, wondering why connection feels so hard. And know that change is possible. It takes time, it takes courage, it takes patience with yourself, but it is absolutely possible to build the relationships and the life you deserve. If this video resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe, because we dive into topics like this all the time, trying to make sense of the psychological patterns that shape our lives and finding ways forward. Take care of yourself, and remember, you don't have to do it alone anymore.